Доброго дня, шановні колеги.
Dear colleagues, good afternoon. We will begin our round table, which is tradition, which is good or not, but we are discussing the questions of creating new legislation for the regulator. Then we have representatives of Parliament Committee for this sector, and we are here to discuss what can we do together. Responsible politicians, responsible officials, responsible experts, in order for a regulator to work in a way that we would hope, or we have hoped about regulator to create a really independent regulator. I will introduce all guests one by one. For all of us to have time to discuss, I will ask you, dear guests, to keep within 5 minutes, and also the first floor to Olena Pavlenko, a DiXi group NGO that has been monitoring this issue for a long time. Thank you, Roman. For a long time, we have been here within this team to launch the process of regulation. Now we will make first summaries, and we will set tasks on how to move forward. About a year ago, the law was passed on energy regulator. And we, as analytical center, DiXi Group, together with coalition, together with support of EU, made analysis on how this law is and was fulfilled during this year. Out of 8 points that were set as objectives, 19 were fulfilled, 10 partially, and 9 still need to be fulfilled. With first objectives that are not complete are key things that do not allow us to talk about launching new powerful regulator yet. That's creating competitive commission and rotation within regulator, and also the matter of budget. If competition commission, we calculated if competition commission uses all terms that are foreseen in the law, not cutting down in time, it will be a period up to 2 months when only 2 members of commission will be actually working, which is very dangerous now when the law on energy market was passed, and now we need to pass so many things, about 200 legislative acts in order to launch this process. The regulator might correct, but after the members are chosen, regulator needs to remain strong, independent, and to have all powers to regulate gas and energy electricity markets. So we are talking about how to ensure all process after we pass and launch the law for a regulator to work and to remain independent. Thank you. Thank you, Olena. I'll give the floor to Oleksandr Dombrovskyi, acting chief of Fuel and Energy Committee in the Parliament. I ask all speakers to discuss our plans about what can be done, because we will hear so many times about how everything is bad and how we will end up worse. We will hear this in media, but let's talk about the steps, what we expect, and how we make sure that the regulator works for the interests of citizens. Thank you. Good afternoon, dear friends, colleagues. First of all, I'd like to thank you for this huge interest to the matter for today's meeting. I believe the fact of the number of participants at our round table states how important this problem is. For our committee, this is a very successful place, because energy efficiency fund, energy efficiency in buildings, we have voted for it, and now the bills became laws. So I'm very optimistic. We are very optimistic in Fuel and Energy Committee, and the problems that we have with regulator is temporary, and both politically and organizationally we would be able to overcome. How do I see the problem and solution? On one hand, everything is very simple. on 1st September, we have enacted association agreement, and Ukraine, as a nation with all its institutions, is obliged to fulfill all requirements we have taken. Independent regulator is one of the key requirements that we have promised to fulfill. 2 circles that we, 2 rounds that we had in the Parliament to vote to select members of the nomination commission, and result is null. We lost time. What do we intend to do? Well, we have agreement with head of the Parliament, have signed letter that went to the Parliament leaders, and we have hopes that factions, according to the law, on independent regulator will respond. And on Tuesday, next Tuesday, from factions we will receive proposals on members that we will review at 2 committees, one for fuel and energy, and the other for housing and municipal policy. Optimistically, I think that we have possibility at the session of our committee. We'll have our own decision. We'll put it in the Parliament, and then on Thursday, as voting day, we will focus political will. I think on behalf of the Ukrainian Parliament, we'll vote for 2 nominants in this commission. I know position of Ukrainian government. They're ready to introduce their candidate. As far as I know, as I've heard, President and his administration feel and understand the problem. President is ready to submit 2 of his candidates, but considering that we live in parliamentary presidential model, we expect things from Ukrainian Parliament, and I'm optimist. I believe that in the near future, either in the nearest weeks, the Parliament will be able to do that, despite actions of some political factions to cause premature elections. Why this is important? Because we need not just independent regulator. Today, even from operative standpoint, regulator passes many important decisions, and I must say that with all criticality that we get in media, I think we don't objectively, or not fully objectively assess decisions that regulator takes this time, makes it this time, and how huge responsibility is. Now we have implemented, well, we are in process of energy market law. On Friday we'll have 2nd session of coordination center that defines all the key tasks to implement by 1st July 2019 the full energy market. Regulator has huge responsibility for the secondary legislation. We have to have powerful, independent, uninvolved regulators so that the law on energy market would be implemented according to European directives. In addition, I'd like to remind you that part of the problems related to the market of natural gas, it's conflict that we have today between the government and the Naftogaz. There is also an important role of regulator to resolve as independent authorized government agency, and so the decision about regulator will be a new breath to Ukrainian economy reform if this problem is delayed or postponed, and we'll have only 2 members of the regulator, and the body will not be in full capacity and will not be able to make decisions. Then the huge energy that we all have invested both in the government and in the Parliament and expert community and working together with donors and international partners, all this work will be stopped. So our key position is to promote energy reforms in our country, to create civilized European rules of the game, to transform the model to focus on interest of consumer and those who want to generate whatever and to earn as much. So it's important to create powerful regulator, independent regulator, and I will do everything to focus on this problem and to solve it. Thank you, Oleksandr. Now I'll give the floor to Olga Belkova, who is deputy chief of this parliamentary committee. Thank you. Greetings. I agree with 90% of what my colleague Oleksandr Dombrovskyi said. We were supposed to have another person here who we discussed a lot about situation. We wrote even an article together, and we plan to publish it tomorrow at the Mirror, Weekly Mirror, and we called it Rotacja Plus, Rotation Plus, and why the law on regulator does not work. We need to recognize that we are co-authors of this bill, and we need to recognize that it is not working independently as it should be, because the word independent means several important, clear things. First, who selects the members of this very important agency? Its renewal was not done. Most fights in the parliamentary hall happened about the norm, who and in what way will nominate members of nomination committee. Let's recognize the truth here. Today, they're not fighting about presenting their candidates. President has not appointed, Parliament has not appointed, and Cabinet has not appointed. I received a letter from Johannes today that gave me two sentences. Dear Olga, we plan to appoint our representative. When and how? Never mentioned, but they're planning it, so okay. Different in opinion from Oleksandr Dombrovskyi, I believe President and Cabinet could show. And I understand we are opposing each other. We want to see their leadership to appoint these representatives, because unlike the Parliament, very complicated in its composition due to political considerations, these agencies are united in their philosophy, and they could expediently appoint their candidates. Competition on appointment is lacking, so I invite my colleagues in the administration of the president, in the government, to use their right given by law to appoint their representatives to nomination commission. But that's not the only problem in implementation of this law. As we already heard today, there is a huge problem with financing regulator. Our colleagues from the budgetary committee have not approved the budget that was prepared by existing regulator composition. One of the important norms is norm on financing, to make sure that we would have there not just people who would be signing papers, but would people with deep understanding of the sector, people with intellectual and technical component, and we do care who will be there. We have worked with the head of the NKREKP about how important it is, and I'm ready to join in fight for financing if other parts, especially rotation part, would start working well. Third component that I'd like to focus on that does give me a lot of concern, and we were fighting for independence in decision making, and in practice the norm is worded in a way that the NKREKP makes independent decisions and holds sole responsibility. This is a revolution norm because majority of decisions of regulators, other regulators in Ukraine are coordinated with either Ministry of Justice or the cabinet of the ministers, but as a part of agreement with the European Union, we need to make this new agency, or an NKREKP, independent in decision making and fully responsible for either good decisions or absurd decisions. So this is collective responsibility, but members make decisions, so this responsibility would be clear. Today, Uredowy Courier publishes selectively decisions of the NKREKP. But it turns out that Uredowy Courier knows better than the government what decisions to publish and what not to publish. Finally, to end my presentation, I'd like to say the following. when we are having large-scale reforms in Ukraine, it's not a matter of personalities and who should be in those agencies and for how long and how they should be replaced. Society has certain expectations. And in my deep conviction, today's composition of NKREKP and the story around the nominations and rotation requires of us expedient relaunch of this agency. This is not a question of personalities. I really respect Dmytro, as among others. He is present here. We had many professional discussions. Not always we agreed, but I would really like to see in what way this agency could receive trust back from consumers, from the market, and from everyone else who depends on the decision of this agency. This rotation is unavoidable and has to be expedited. Thank you. 2 seconds. We're not opposing to each other. I share this idea. I want president and the government to give their candidates first, but I'm just registering the fact of today. Someone needs to be first. Oleksii Ryabchyn, your position. Dear colleagues, Oleksii Ryabchyn, Batkivschyna, Energy, Efficiency Subcommittee. I'm co-author of this bill. For a year we had working group together with this group, but I couldn't vote for this bill because political appointments did not allow to make this regulator independent, professional, and fully functional. I am a member of your optimist group in the parliament, but I'm Euro realist or even Euro pessimist in this matter. Why? What perspectives do we have to expediently appoint a nomination commission that will select new composition of the regulator? Chances are just as high as possibilities of appointing heads of committees in the parliament to turn acting ministers into ministers, actually, ambassadors. Chances are just as high. This is a systemic problem that is not resolved for several years already. Second question, and it's not just a question of professionalism. In our committee, we have worked through the bill, but this is political, not professional question. It's appointment. Let's look at political will, whether there is political will to appoint independent, powerful, professional regulator. Everyone in this room and everyone watching us on TV, they understand whether there is political will or not. Let's look from political standpoint. There are 3 players who appoint the nomination commission, are responsible for that: President, Ministry of Energy, Parliament, and 2 committees. President, we know his name. Minister of Energy is within Petro Poroshenko's unit, Mr. Nasalik. Leadership committee also Petro Poroshenko bloc. So political decision we see for the powerful regulator by fact depends on one political power from one political person, one human being. Dmytro, Vovk, and other commissioners were appointed to this commission by the order of the President of Ukraine. That's second question. Third question, why I'm so pessimistic a bit about the situation. DiXi group made a very professional analysis that we can monitor the bill and the law, how it's fulfilled or not. Constitutionality of this commission is doubted because, by fact, we understand that the President has no powers to appoint commissioners. We have a letter from Mr. Parubi that Parliament cannot do that. That's response to Constitutional Court statement. So there is a question whether we can submit the changes to Constitution, whether this agency can be established during war. So that's the third question. Third question that does not make me optimistic. What really can we do? Because it's easy to solve. It's hard to bring back together. Batkivschyna is in opposition, but we do support creating independent, professional bodies and agencies. But here we have nominated our candidate for nominations. They were not approved in the committee. We will resubmit. But now we are focused on protection of consumers, and together with my colleagues in the committee and together with other members, together with ministries, we have submitted bill on energy ombudsman that is part of fulfilling the procedure on the narco establishment, and we'll have, I'm sure we'll have a discussion in the committee to protect consumers' rights, because this matter is not balanced. I believe the Commission, it's not natural function for the Commission to balance producers and consumers' function. We need to strengthen the position of consumers, but unfortunately, Uradowy Courier does not publish the decisions, and I have made official request, and Braga, the editor-in-chief, said that the reasons are they're not paying for publication. So as my colleague Olga said, they are publishing or not publishing based on their own discretion. But they're blaming the lack of financing. I look at the budget. There is a special line for the Secretariat of Cabinet of Ministers to publish their decisions in the official government paper, but that's not happening, or at least not always. So, Dmytro, how much do we need? You need financing. I will pass this additional amendment, so you will get all financing you need, just to make sure that all your decisions are officially published. I agree, Olena. It's not a matter of personalities. It's a matter of trust. Why I'm less optimistic? Because it's a question of trust to existing composition of the NERC. They made some quite professional things, but people remember this composition due to some unprofessional things. And how do we renew trust to Commission with a new composition? And I hope the new composition will come soon. But there are doubts about this, so I want to see that in my own eyes, and I would like to give every effort together with my colleagues committee. Thank you. And now we'll move to Dmytro Vovk, the chairman of the Commission. If we remove the political questions that are not natural to regulator, what needs to be done to renew trust? Everyone before me mentioned that. What do we need to restore trust? Trust is a political sentence, so I'd like to thank everyone present here who joined in voting for the law. It was passed finally. Thank you. But if we look at the material prepared by DiXi Group about assessment of the progress and reform of the NERC, we see that National Commission has fulfilled all its obligation, and status on maybe all categories was either fully or partially fulfilled. Other things were not fulfilled, but not that one. I disagree with the statement that rotation will impact reforms or will cause improvement. Independence. Let's talk about measurements of this independence and how it can be assured. In the law, one of the measurements is financial independence. We have some good news here, because on the 20th of September, the Budget Commission finally approved the budget for 2018. We still need to get a decision from the Parliament to change budget code, and then financial independence will be assured for 2018. That was a complicated process, and I'd like to thank the members of the Parliament in the Profile Committee have supported us after so many negotiations. second part of independence, operational independence. And now we look at simple example of governmental paper. Lack of interference from other parts of the government is not fulfilled. And there is no objective explanation. Some of our decisions are not published. Way about stimulating tariff setting that is developed together with USAID, or some decisions about levels of tariffs for alternative energy, or there could be delay in publication of new agreement with renewable energy sources entities. So it's said that some decisions that have no debate are still delayed in publication. So we finally come to understanding that for the future, or even now, we have time to rethink what is necessary for independence. And in our opinion, to regain trust, as Roman said, and to progress in reforms, we need to make sure that all professional decisions that were prepared previously by National Commission will get external assessment, and that will be assessed by energy community to get de jure assessment of state of independence, de facto state of independence, and also assessment of specific professional decisions. Talking about what to do next, how to promote further reforms, I can tell you the following. Talking about a plan of the Parliament agenda, and the fact that the Commission will be legal with all governmental entities, all state entities to send their commissioners, including Parliament and President and government. So three directions have been proposed, and one is earlier review of decisions necessary for energy market. Agenda for this reform was amended due to objective things we watch now. Then we have prepared changes to norm base, to secondary legislation, to make some process long term, so that even if we don't have quorum, that for some time that would not delay reforms. And also we need to launch review for tariffs of 2018 as early as possible. Lack of quorum is bad, of course, but we have also example of United States, where this year quorum was lacking for 6 months at least. That, of course, affected the sector negatively. We tried to prepare as much as we could to this negative scenario, and we do hope that in December, nomination commission will be able to submit candidates for presidential approval. These candidates will be approved, and the time of absence of quorum would be minimized. That's it on my part. Thank you. So, how many millions agreements or thousands of agreements you need to have that article in your budget? Tell me how much. You're talking about the Uridowy Courier. Yes, we will get you the money. You said operational, financial independence, political independence. You didn't talk about political independence, and that's what I have been stressing. Dear Oleksii, as budget changes this year were voted, majority of parliament members have supported changes to increase financing of Uridowy Courier, including the funds necessary for a national commission. I don't know how much funds are lacking, how they know that it's money that are lacking for our publications, whatever, but the fact is there is selective and unchronological printing of our regulations. Configuration of appointment depends on political system of specific country. My task as a head of commission of a new composition to work in conditions of independence, and I explained what are threats that we face every day. Thank you. We have an amazing list of partners of Ukraine that have helped and keep helping in implementing Euro integrational laws. So I'd like to invite Johannes Baur, first advisor of and chief of operational section of European Station in Ukraine. Please list the risks that there are for Ukraine if reforms are delayed or cancelled. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you will hear a large agreement also between a lot of actors here on the table in evaluating the situation. I think we are facing now currently two critical issues when we see what is happening in the energy sector reforms. One is, of course, Naftogaz restructuring and unbundling, and the second for me is the issue of the regulator. The regulator, as you know, probably plays a key role in implementing the envisaged energy sector reforms and in implementing the third energy package as foreseen by the gas law and by the electricity law and by the regulator's law, all adopted by the Rada. The regulator plays a key role because it has to ensure a balance of the market. It has to oversee market players, that they are playing according to the rule, and the regulator has a specific role in protecting consumers. And these important tasks, of course, can only be fulfilled if the regulator is functioning. There has been already a lot said about the independence of the regulator, which is indeed a key requirement. Independence means, according to the third energy package, indeed political independence, not only from the political institutions but also from the market players, of course. So it's a double independence there, and it means, of course, as also mentioned, financial independence. And these are key issues which are foreseen in the law and which have to be implemented. And of course, the rotation of the commissioners is part of the law, and that is something which has now to be implemented, because in the current situation, it is key for the further progress of energy sector reforms that there is trust in the regulator, and this trust, I think, can only be built up if the law is properly implemented, and financial independence and the rotation is done properly. I think we in this situation we can only call upon all players, so the president, the government, and the Rada to nominate the respective people for the nomination and selection committee. I think the international community, and that is also foreseen in the law, is ready to support also in that process. And this has to be done really rather quickly and very quickly, because a number of important decisions have to be taken by this regulator in implementing further gas sector reforms, but also in preparing the implementation of the electricity law, which is an equally important reform step. Thank you.
Дякую. Також запрошую до слова пана Шукру Богут.
Thank you. I invite also Mr. Shukru Bogut, Senior Energy Advisor, USAID Office in Ukraine.
DiXi Group for the activity. I'll be brief with my comments. We'll be talking on the independence and the competency of the regulatory agency. The functional energy markets require an independent and a competent energy sector regulator, and this is a fundamental requirement for the establishment of competitive energy markets in electricity, gas, district heating, and other regulatory areas in the energy sector. Ukraine has committed into integration into the EU legal and regulatory framework. And for the energy area, this integration is through the membership in the Energy Community Treaty and under the oversight of the Energy Community Secretariat. The energy regulator should be independent from the commercial and the political influence and be only accountable to the consumers and citizens in order to achieve the maximum public benefit. For developing countries with household incomes not be able to pay the monthly utility bills, or in other words, those populations that are under the energy poverty, the governments need to provide subsidies on behalf of the taxpayers, not the ratepayers, but taxpayers, and the subsidy programs are usually under the government control. So there is a fine balance in tariff determinations between the independent energy regulator and the government subsidy programs, which are ultimately funded by the tariff-paying consumers and taxpayers. For Ukraine, current regulatory issues affecting the regulatory independences are because New York needs to maintain the quorum on board of the commissioners level, with a possible risk of losing this quorum in November, December of this year. Time is of the essence for the establishment of a selection committee between the Rada and the government. New York's financial independence requires an amendment to the budget code and of Ukraine to allow proper sources of regulatory income. Until New York becomes self-sufficient with regulatory fees, the state budget should be amended for proper amounts of money so that New York can operate and maintain proper talent and with the agency. New York also needs to have proper authority to timely publish the regulatory decisions, including those that are upcoming with the secondary legislative acts of the electricity market law. Thank you.
Дуже дякую. Передаю слово пані Людмилі Бутенко, керівник.
Thank you very much. I'm giving the floor to Lyudmila Butenko, Program Manager for Infrastructure and Sustainable Development at the World Bank Group.
For the World Bank as well, it's very important to have a well-functioning independent regulator. You cannot overestimate the importance of this body because it has a very essential role to play to implement the ongoing reforms. And the previous speakers have mentioned them. I just wanted to add some of the arguments of why you have to have a full quorum, well-functioning, high-capacity independent regulator. In terms of the gas sector reform, which is ongoing right now, for example, there is a need to reform the public service obligation for natural gas supply. This is for the current regime with an administered tariff below market price, which prevents competition. It needs to be changed. It's also a source of distortions and potentially fraud and corruption. Then the regulator needs to design and implement tariff methodologies for unbundled gas sector when the unbundling happens. And this is setting the tariffs for transit, storage, distribution, balancing, default suppliers. So there is so much that this body needs to do. There is also a need to establish market monitoring, and previous speakers were talking about consumer protection. So that is only talking about the gas sector. Then there is the new law on wholesale electricity market, which was adopted in May. The law provides for a 2-year period, a grace period before it becomes effective. And it's quite short given the complexity of the actions which need to be undertaken. And somebody mentioned that about 200 different pieces of legislation and rules need to be prepared in this period. So the regulator is critical for the initiation of this wholesale electricity market, and this body will have to validate the detailed implementation rules. Also, in this respect, a regulator will be a key actor for the establishment of the guaranteed buyer for renewables, for example. And this is very important because there is also a renewables program. And how do you regulate that? And also, during the transition period to the wholesale electricity market, given the potential for market power, the regulator needs to be present for consumer protection and, as I mentioned, market monitoring. Another reform which is urgently needed is the district heating, because as you all know, the sector is under serious financial stress. And the regulator need to complete transaction towards the cost-reflective tariffs that would be providing incentives for efficiency and revision of investment approval procedures, because it also there have been delays for objective reasons, but this is just 3 areas where the work of the regulator is so important. Many speakers have emphasized the need for the regulator to be independent, and also that it needs to be financially independent. It was very good to hear from Mr. Vovk that the changes to the budget code are awaiting parliamentary approval. So there is a movement in this respect, because this was also one of our concerns, and we as a group of development partners have been discussing this with the government. So that's a very good signal. On the other hand, the current situation with rotation of the regulator is a very negative signal to the market as well, because we are all looking for transparent selection of commissioners, which are based on the competence of the commissioners as required by Article 8 of the law. So Ukraine also needs to think about the signals to the market, which this situation sends. In general, this is very important for the credibility of the country, because Ukraine needs to show that it is a reliable counterpart for energy supply and transport, because there are various plans for both electricity exports and imports, and joining the European market, and also looking at the gas.
Дякую.
Thank you.
Last thing I wanted to say is that we do hope that the nomination committee will be constituted or reconstituted very fast, and the appointment of commissioners will happen, because it is very important to have a body which which will have the quality and capacity to do the proper decision making.
Дякую. Короткий коментар, пане Олександр Домбровський.
Thank you. A small comment from Oleksandr Dombrovskyi. Small comment from me, yes. Because we have discussion in parallel about what has happened. Please discuss what you have heard and what you mentioned. Dombrovskyi did not say that some key institutions take responsibility for the crisis and someone who is not responsible for the crisis was regulator. All 3 key institutions of the state who have not fulfilled their mission carry equal responsibility for a crisis with regulator that we discussed today. So please don't give me words that I didn't say or what you've heard. We'll have time for discussion. It's already getting through social networks and coming back to us here online, but let's go through the people we have invited. Marina Petrov, Deputy Director of the European Bank of Reconstruction Development in Ukraine.
After all the speakers that are speaking pretty much the same voice, that we are facing a very serious situation in terms of lack of implementation of a reform that was widely supported by the international community and was welcomed by everyone. In our view, the adoption of the gas market law in 2015, the regulator law in 2016, the electricity market law in 2017 were all very positive signals that were sent to investors, to international partners of Ukraine, that the reform of the energy sector is being taken very seriously and that significant efforts are being made in order to change the situation where the sector had a very poor reputation and where investors were unwilling to come to Ukraine. So definitely, what we see today is lack of implementation. We have a law that is significantly compliant with the third energy package. It was certified by the Energy Community Secretariat as significantly compliant. But passing the law is just the first step, and it's extremely important that we now move into implementation. And this refers not only to the implementation of this law, but also the gas market law. Clearly, the authorities are behind the schedule in unbundling of Naftogaz, of abolishment of PSO, and many other reforms that are required for the gas sector. It was already mentioned that there is a very short period of time for the implementation of the electricity market law, and again, we have to act jointly in order to make sure that the implementation of the law starts as soon as possible. Because we may face the same situation that we're having today, that we'll be having press conferences explaining why another law is not implemented in accordance with the schedule. But the one thing I also wanted maybe to mention is our perspective as the largest creditor to the private sector. The rotation of the regulator and the functioning of the proper regulator is extremely important for any private sector investors that are looking into coming to Ukraine. And here I'm talking about both privatization. You know that there are certain plans on privatizing energy sector companies, and clearly in the absence of the regulator, the perceived risks for the investors would be extremely high, and it will be very difficult to attract reputable investors without, proper tariffs and without comfort that you have an independent regulator that will be not promoting interests of, certain groups of vested interests, but would be acting in the interest of the entire market. The other issue that we have is primarily the publication of the decisions that were already approved by the regulator. And I could give you, two specific examples where we, as investors, are having difficulties. For example, the regulator has approved the new template for the power purchase agreement for the renewable energy. And again, many of you know that we are the largest financier to the renewable energy sector. We have provided more than 100 million euros to various renewable companies, and it's becoming more and more of an issue for us that we need the new template power purchase agreement that would be long-term, that would provide sufficient comfort to the creditor. It is my understanding that today was the last day for the publication of the template in the official gazette, and to the best of my knowledge, this has not happened. There is another set of financial agreements that we are negotiating to support the import of gas into Ukraine by private sector operators for the coming winter. We are in the dialogue with the regulator on also modifying the power purchase agreement for the gas, as well as the storage the transportation and storage agreements for the gas, that would be extremely important, to be amended in order to give comfort to the traders that will be bringing gas to Ukraine, that they are, treated adequately and they have equal access, to all other market players. If at the end of October, the regulator will lose the capacity to make any decisions, that means that for this winter we will not be able to amend these templates, and that it will be very difficult to convince traders to come and bring private sector money into financing of gas storage for the winter. So clearly, I think that it's time now to act. It's time now to implement the law. On our side, we would be willing to provide whatever assistance is required to the Ukrainian authorities in order to help in the implementation of the law. But it's very disappointing that we are having this discussion today, and we really hope that next time we'll have a meeting to discuss the results of the selection committee and to announce that we have a regulator that is functioning in accordance with the new law. Thank you.
Дякую. І я ще запрошую до слова пана Євгена Бистрицького, виконавчого директора Міжнародного фонду.
Yevhen Bystritsky, Executive Director of International Foundation Renaissance, Ukrainian foundation that supports this reform. Thank you for this privilege to speak at the end, when all key characteristics of the crisis with regulator were named. Even much more was said about importance of democratization of energy market in Ukraine. I'd like to say that as I speak last, I'd like to underline that this Renaissance Foundation, together with DiXi Group, we have initiated this project to amend legislation and to pass new bill on regulator. What we see is not just regulator crisis. This is just a very tolerant title. This is a crisis of political will to reforms. That's how I would call it. It's evident if three power branches cannot fulfill their obligations, that's crisis of the government as a whole to fulfill the law. I remember how difficult debates were to prepare the bill, to pass it. I remember the participation of the members of parliament and independent experts to prepare the bill, to pass the law. It was passed with pressure of civil society and our colleagues from international organizations in Europe. But what do we do next? This roundtable, this conference, should stimulate all three sides to resolve this crisis, to do their best. But I'd like to underline that this lagging behind with reforms is felt in other sectors, not just energy. Renaissance Foundation supported this because energy sector, energy market, energy business was and remains, as far as I can judge, expressing just my opinion, could be the source of funds that would impact overcoming corruption in Ukraine. This is a huge problem for Ukraine. So creating a regulator as independent body, independent commission, that's extremely important. I'd like to say that civil society will not stop working. We will beat every bell, ring every bell. But as we select candidates into commission, that should be created by three sections of power in Ukraine, we need also to attract experts that would assess corruptibility of all candidates, as we have integrity council for a high commission of selecting judges. My apologies. Because this crisis demonstrates that even for candidates that would be selected, we cannot high trust to all of them 100%. To conclude these statements of mine, I'd like to say that culture of public decision making is only being born in Ukraine. Culture of public policy, and this is an example of public approach. Example of public work to select possible candidates and members of regulator. This is first example. And I'd like to point out that here we see crisis of political will concerning members of supervisory body for Naftogaz. This is crisis not so much as of members. It's crisis of inability of the state, of those who seem to protect public interest, but they're not willing to consider the opinion of independent councils, independent supervisors. And this is one of most important anti-corruption components of Ukraine, and we will keep supporting these processes as we have been until now. Before we can get questions, I'd like to get some comments from Olga Belkova and Oleksii Ryabchyn. I want to apologize that we have to go to other meeting. I'd like to respond to a statement that I'd like to clarify, and then I would like to discuss, because that's one of the key for the future. Dmytro, did I understand you correctly that this composition of the regulator would accelerate decision-making for many decisions, considering that you understand that the situation may come up that you would not have sufficient members in the Commission. Is that correct? We want to expedite decisions that are important. A, to implement the law on electricity market. B, decisions that would impact stable passing through a heating season of 2017-2018, and decisions that would allow to exist without quorum for certain times. Okay, thank you. So you need to work together with the committee and with the general public to list those decisions. Why I insist so much here? Because I would not like to get into the situation where current composition of the Commission will make decisions for billions, you know, the graduating song, and then this trust to the agency is trust to agency, but also to people. Your decisions are important, but it's also important to make sure that these decisions are passed by people whose horizon of understanding their own career in this agency and their responsibility is longer than 6 months. That's my wish as comments. And all people have seen an example of operation of non-interference in the activity of Commission. Ms. Olga. I need to accompany her, and I can fully agree with her. I couldn't say better. Then we will not have quorum of parliament members. Last thing I'd like to say about political will. Everyone remembers, if there is political will to have an appointment for a very high position, then for this position the laws are changed about criteria, about education, whether it's necessary or not. Decisions are printed in Uredowy Courier, and in 4 hours President submits and Parliament votes. If there is political will, everything can happen. If there is no political will, it doesn't matter how many professional discussions we would have, it would be repetition of the same story, hoping that this time situation would change through the pressure of NGOs, international partners, and sound mind, actually. I'd like to give opportunity for the audience to ask questions, brief questions, and 1 minute to respond. Question to Ms. Butenko and other representatives of international donors. One of the reasons of absence of rotation is a question of tariffs. To set market tariffs or not. So what should the government do in Ukraine? For tariffs to be justified in the market? What measures need to be implemented? And will these justified by market tariffs, will these independent cost-efficient tariffs promote independent market in Ukraine or security of market? So, Ms. Butenko, please, and then Mr. Baur and the rest of our guests, please respond.
Дякую за запитання.
Thank you for your question. In order to have market level tariffs, you need to have a market. In order to have a market, you need to have rules at the market. Rules that will help creating, rules that will, regulator will help create. So there should be a sequence of actions. As I said in my presentation, we should have competent commissioners, independent commissioners that could make these decisions, make calculations, because this is also huge work that must be done by these people to base tariffs on on market conditions, as you said. Thank you. You raise your hands, Andrei. Andrei Zinchenko, Ekonomiczna Prawda, Economic Truth. I see representatives of the Parliament, of regulator, international partners. I don't see representatives of presidential administration. So the question to two people, to you, Oleksandr, why are they not here? Why? I'm sure you invited them, Olena. What was their response? The key player, without whom nothing would happen, is not present here while others are present. Let me begin. Yes, we did invite everyone. All stakeholders have received invitations. Their response was, there are other obligations that they have. But I'd like to stress here that I don't know who is key player here that would not be present. In my opinion, I have mentioned at RPR, responsibility for nomination commission is on three sides, all three sides. So our calls, our attempt to launch the process should be directed in all three directions. That's what we are trying to do, in principle. What else I'd like to say? This would be a political statement, not expert statement. But if we are talking about a situation where the nation could remain without regulation of the market for 2 months, then dividing parliament into opposition and government is false. That's a matter of national security. We need to unite and make decisions here. Natalka Prutka. A short answer, Andrei. I came in here. Shimkiv was leaving this building. We had a brief exchange, he said. I support making decisions. Why cabinet is not present and president of administration, why they're not present, that's not a question of my competency. Natalka Prutka, as independent observer, a journalist, as an economic reporter, you're talking about great reforms that you're saying launched greatly. They actually are dying in debt obligations. Situation that we face at the Commission, the reforms are burning out. NKREKP is hiding. First time from their activity, they have not published their website the reports on after an annual session of NKREKP. DiXi Group knows transparent energy project is also having problem. I cannot get an answer from any organization because volumes of debts and corruption are exceeding everything in Ukraine. I don't know what reforms we can talk about. Risk of huge debts. As third energy package is introduced, Commission is losing many powers, including setting price for gas as product, and same thing would be true on the electricity market. Our focus will be on natural monopolies, and that would be the smallest part of payments procedure. We need to create a legislative base that would facilitate investment increase. Yeah, and this is a task that is done together with USAID, with World Bank, with other entities. We have these regular meetings on tariff setting, and we will focus as Commission not on political things, general things, but on things that would be important for the sector and that would be professionally reasonable in our time. But then the time will decide, will show whether our decisions were independent or politically engaged. Mr. Thaler, I'll try to answer about the debt. I don't believe that energy reforms are being stifled by the debts in the civilized world, and in Ukraine there are many instruments to work with these debts. I'm surprised you don't have numbers on energy market. Let's get 2 weeks after September. I'll get you full information for the 9 months in section of all stakeholders. But there is great opposition, but reforms are not stopping. We have a model that is fully monopolized with certain significant corruption elements, and we have no market, and all the laws and decisions that we passed and we try to implement together with the regulator give opportunity to compete and to change this market. Yes, today there are many companies, including those who are not happy with competition, who are not happy with structure of cost that we have, and this is a normal struggle. Some of my colleagues left, but step by step, whether some people want or not, will move forward. Questions of speed, I'd like to expedite. Another question. Roman Ivanchenko in Ukraine. Question first to Dmytro about the package of decisions. It must be made before cadence of this majority will run out. Will it include transferring the company to independent regulation? Will some energy companies transfer to new system of energy market, and the distribution payments will be introduced, like connection payments. How about Rotterdam rules? There is some methodologies of the cogeneration plants, and for coal that will go for coal generation. So, and then thermal generation. So, also the question that in conditions of limited time, and that when the parliament cannot agree about the candidates, seemingly, president and cabinet of a ministry will appoint their members in nomination commission, and with formal majority they will just appoint members that they can control in the regulator. How would you assess this kind of development if it happens? Thank you for your question, Roman. I'd like to remind to everyone who does know that all people present here, experts and consumers, have access to all decisions of Commission. All decision of Commission related to tariffs or investment programs or methodologies is done in open discussion. Talking about tariffs, it has and investment programs, it has two parts: local discussions with local government and then level of Commission. Overall, this process takes about 2 months. Considering that Uryadowy Courier has not published some important elements of tariff setting in all sectors and not just in Obolenergo, I believe that the chance of such decision is too low, considering methodology is not approved and public political assessment from the government that is not acceptable, which is against position of international donors expressed in written form, and the lack of public hearing where licensees would explain the advantages of their ideas. That discussion that was in the spring about connection payment, and some of donors were present at those meetings, we came to conclusion that in principle regulator acted professionally, but communication was not complete. To remove these shortcomings, we had professional public discussions throughout the summer, but even after those who wanted to understand could do that, but we faced physical interference in the work of Commission when some armed men came into Commission, and law enforcement did not secure us to provide independence. So without open hearings locally, approval of tariffs based on capacity principle is delayed. In my opinion, this is postponed. This is bad for market development, bad for effective functioning of gas distribution system. And third position, about electricity market. This is our huge priority, to launch all regulatory acts. Even today at the session of Commission, we have approved draft license conditions for new market conditions, trading of market operator of distributive networks, and we will keep working to ensure that reforms continue. That's our priority. Thank you. Comment from our colleagues, Mr. Johannes. Mr. Johannes, you have a comment about risk of appointing politically engaged members of Commission. Will you respond about that?
Well, I think that is something we have to see. The first step is to nominate the selection committee, and then of course it is important that the selection process indeed is closely watched at, also by civil society. I think that is clear, in order to ensure that there will be really professional and independent candidates. I think that is all I can say to this point, and we hope very much now that the first step is done and the selection committee can start. The law foresees also international participation in the as observer in the selection committee, and I think there's readiness to go to the step and to look also that this is done in a proper way, and of course if the law foresees the participation of the three institutions, then this should be done. So all three institutions should send their representatives. I don't think it's our solution to say that we can do it without the parliament.
Дякую. Дякую нашим учасникам. Дякую всім за участь. Я попрошу підсумувати.
Thank you, all participants. Olena, Pavlenko, please summarize this discussion. You started this discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you for this interest. And the number of people who showed up today say that the question of regulator is very high on agenda, not just for our politicians, but also for activists, journalists, observers. It's very important, and we ask journalists as well as everybody else to monitor the process, how this competition commission is organized, how nominations happen. The law has very transparent mechanism of organizing this competition. It would almost include video broadcast. So if you want to monitor and watch the process, you will have this opportunity. And I think this would be answer to your question, Mr. Roman. In this roundtable, we wanted to show how important this question is for all participants of the market, for international partners, for everyone in civil expert organizations, and how much we expect these problems to be resolved to make sure that this regulator, after selection of new members of the regulator, will become strong, independent, and able to implement the laws in the full capacity. So we turn again to all who is involved in the process of nominating commission, president, parliament, cabinet of ministers, to expedite delegating your candidates and to give opportunity to unblock the work of renew the regulator to launch and to promote reforms. We hope your participation, international partners, and everyone who is interested. Thank you. Mr. Oleksandr? I'd like to give 3 comments. First, our situation is impossible because the nomination commission can start working only when everyone of key public stakeholders fulfill the mission. There are 5. 2, 3, 4 will make the work unstartable. So, second position, I have a proposition to journalists, to experts, to all expert community. Friends, let's formulate list of experienced, professional people who can be member of nomination commission. Let's organize professional expert community voting for these people, so that we would try setting certain standard for those people. It's not just members of the NKREKP that should be so professional and objective and experienced people who would be able to recommend to the president members of future regulator. And in the parliament, we made 2 iteration, unfortunately unsuccessful, but the proposals that were given by the factions, by some exception, were doubtful. Some political factions have not submit anyone. So let's, considering this critical importance of implementation of this bill, this law, let's create a list. Let's make a standard that president and the parliament and cabinet would use to move forward. And message number 3 for all. In energy, we have too many problems accumulated, and responding after Dmytro about regulation. Average level of wear and tear of distribution and transporting facilities, as well as other parts. Everything is worn and torn. I went to Kalinivka. I was there for 24 hours, where all the explosions are happening and have been happening. That's reflective of our energy situation. If we're talking about regulation, it's not political discussion. It's discussion where, in what way we can invest or reinvest into renewal of all the means, all the facilities in gas system and electric system, so that our country will not collapse. So these political ambitious discussion will not lead us to the situation where people say, give us at least some electricity, give us at least some gas, because transformers will burn out, gas pipes will not will not give gas, gas pipes will not give gas, and this is national energy security matter, and we need to work accordingly. Committee of Fuel and Energy is not political. We try to be professional, qualified body in the Parliament. And I invite everyone to discuss any thing based on our platform. We're open. We do not have closed topic. We are ready to work with you to develop the country. So if really we can invite huge number of organizations, when, where, in what way, and who of three players will read this list? We don't need to invite organizations, expert community, professional community, need to generate the names, vote for them, and create a package of 10 ideal candidates who, by their importance and professional abilities, with their experience, would be able to participate in nomination commission. That's one of options of what can expert community do, what can journalists do, what professionals can do. Thank you. Thank you all. Well, thank you, European Union and Renaissance Foundation, to support even this event. And goodbye. Thank you.